All my life, I've been a global traveller, seeking cultures and traditions that are just as vibrant today as in times past. We're opening doors, stepping into worlds most never see, because that's where the best stories are. We're sharing tales of local life and the working world, plus spending time with some of the most interesting people you'd ever want to meet. It's truly privileged access that always leaves me excited to explore more. Today, in honour of VE Day, we'll take a look at several fascinating stories from the turbulent times of World War II. We'll learn about how Danish citizens outwitted the Nazis to save Jewish lives, and revisit the dramatic shores of Normandy in France. Then head to Norway to see how a shoe played a vital role in the resistance movement. Our first stop takes us to Denmark, where the will of its people made a difference to so many lives.
In the small town of Dragør on the Danish coast, there's a small plaque. A reminder of a time when Denmark was not the oasis of calm it is today. A time when fishermen up and down the coast risked everything, putting their humble vessels in harm's way for the sake of their fellow men. The story of these unlikely heroes goes back to 1939. At that time, everyday life in Denmark appeared normal, but it was an uneasy calm that would not last. The Nazis had invaded Poland, starting the Second World War. Denmark, hoping to remain neutral, negotiated a non-aggression pact with the Germans. Yet there was a sense the country was living on borrowed time. On April 9, 1940, less than a year after the agreement had been signed, the Danes' worst fears were realized. The Nazis flooded Denmark with troops from land and sea, an invasion that lasted just 6 hours. The government surrendered after 2, deciding it was better to negotiate their fate rather than fight to the bitter end. In a twist, Hitler chose to treat Denmark as a model protectorate rather than a conquest, a way to illustrate how Europe in the future would look under the Nazis. The police and judicial system were actually left in Danish hands, and King Christian X remained head of state. The uncomfortable arrangement that allowed the illusion of normalcy soon began to unravel as the Germans tightened their grip on the country, implementing censorship, banishing the Communist Party, and increasing their scrutiny of the Jews.
Hvad skal der ske med os?
What is going to happen to us? Everyone asked. There was much fear in the air and discrimination, but it was subtle so as not to upset the rest of the Danish people.
By late 1942, the resistance was gaining strength and momentum. Yet in a strategic blunder, the Germans allowed national elections the following spring. Almost 90% of the population voted and overwhelmingly rejected the Nazis. Strikes and protests came next, but the authorities quickly outlawed any public assembly, and a curfew was instituted when the resistance continued to attack. Finally, on August 29, 1943, martial law was instituted. Having negotiated with the Social Democrats and dispersed the Communists, the Germans turned their eyes to the Jews. After having harassed them for years, they undertook a secret plan in September to sweep up the entire community on the night of the Jewish New Year, when they thought all the Jews would be at home.
Min mor, hun var...
My mother was an Orthodox Jew, but she didn't practice, and though my father was a Christian, she and I had to flee for our safety.
As the army marched house to house, they were stunned to find no one. Nearly all the Jews had vanished, having been tipped off about the impending purge. The race to escape was on. The Jews headed for coastal ports, knowing freedom lay just across the Öresund Strait. Neutral Sweden had committed to accept the Jewish refugees. While some Germans turned a blind eye towards the fleeing population, others conducted a relentless search. no place was safe.
For the local, it was a big risk. People should understand that it was very dangerous to help the Jewish people.
Yet help the locals did, displaying remarkable courage in the face of a terrifying foe. They hid the Jews by day, then slipped them onto fishing boats for the stealth voyage at night. It took almost 2 months.
They was hidden under the nets. They could hear what happened. And you imagine how scary it was for them.
Despite the locals' best efforts, some Jews were captured. Others had to make life-changing decisions in a moment.
Men hun var jo alene, og ingen af jøderne vidste jo, om de kom levende over til Sverige.
My mother, she was alone, and none of the Jews knew if they would make it to Sweden alive. So she made the decision to leave me with one of the fishermen's families until after the war. I was devastated, but knew my mother had given me my best chance at life.
More than 600 times the boats crept out into the darkness, slowly making their way toward the beacon of freedom. More than 99% of Danish Jews managed to survive the war. A remarkable statistic when compared to the casualties experienced by Jews in other European countries.
Many Danish people helped me in dangerous times. And after the war, I was lucky enough to find my parents again. So fate was very kind to me.
Så skæbnen var rigtig mild mod mig.
The rescue of the Danish Jews is a proud moment in the turbulent times of World War II that simply must not be forgotten.
Now we're off to France and the imposing beaches of Normandy, where one of the world's most significant battles unfolded.
The peace and tranquility of this French coastline belies its turbulent past.
It was along these Normandy beaches that the course of world history changed forever. On June 6, 1944, the Allies landed.
Facing imposing terrain, stormy weather, and near constant enemy fire, more than 150,000 troops fought their way ashore. Today, reminders of the D-Day battle line the coast. An exploration of Normandy's rugged shores serves as a stark reminder of the daunting odds those young soldiers faced in their quest to free Europe. Omaha Beach was the scene of D-Day's most intense combat. Amid the mined hedgehogs and machine gun fire, thousands of brave soldiers fell in their quest to control this 5-mile-long beach. Point du Hoc, overlooking vital coastline, posed a massive threat. Army rangers scaled 100-foot cliffs to reach it and fought 2 days to hold it. This labyrinth of bunkers and bomb craters is a vivid window into the past. Of Normandy's sites, perhaps none is more significant than this one. We're at the American Military Cemetery near Omaha Beach in France. This is the final resting place of almost 10,000 young American soldiers. It's a place that must never be forgotten. Spanning 172 acres, the cemetery serenely honors these brave young men, most of whom lost their lives during D-Day operations.
The Normandy American Cemetery is actually located right above the battlefield here on Omaha Beach. On 6 June, this was a scene of absolute carnage. This place, it provokes deep thought and contemplation. You have to stop and think, how many places in the world can you go and stand and look and realize that the course of human history changed right here?
Learning about the D-Day landings is important for all generations, and having time to experience the American Military Cemetery, quiet solitude of the memorial, and the Garden of the Missing gives the chance for all to pay respects to those that gave their lives so that we could live.
Here in this place, where the West held together, let us make a vow to our dead. Let us show them by our actions that we understand what they died for. Strengthened by their courage, heartened by their value, and borne by their memory, let us continue to stand for the ideals for which they lived and died.
And finally, we're headed to Norway, where a shoe helped Norwegians defy the Nazis.
Tucked away deep in the Norwegian fjordland is the small town of Åland. It's home to something you wouldn't expect: a shoe factory. It was the vision of a young Nils Tveranger. He launched his shoe in 1908, and it soon won the first prize at the National Fair. Åland's shoe industry boomed, once supporting 19 companies. Now there's just one, built on an iconic Tveranger design.
Most people in the world know what the penny loafer is, but most of us don't know that they actually come from Norway, and this is the original penny loafer.
This is the original penny loafer. It was designed by my great-grandfather back in the late 1920s.
And how did it become a penny loafer, or a Norwegian as some people refer to it as?
Back in 1934 there was 2 American journalists visiting this area, and they write about everything. The nature, the sea, the fjords, but also the shoemaking. And they go back to USA and printed an article. The Bass company, George Henry Bass, liked what he saw and copied it back in 1936 and called it Norwegians, after Norwegians.
So the word Norwegians comes from Norwegians. So he's sort of crediting Norway for his invention. For his inspired invention.
Inspiring.
Norwegians built a loyal following in America and eventually became a huge hit on college campuses, especially with women who preferred Norwegians to high heels. While the shoe has become a long-standing favorite, most people aren't aware that the unique front design actually played an important role in Norway's World War II history.
Back between 1940 and 1945, the Second World War, the Norwegian paper, they used a paperclip in the collar.
To recognize each other?
Yes, and as a symbol of resistance. But they also used a Norwegian øre, 1/10 of a krone.
So they put the 1/10 of the kroner into the little pocket here.
It's been said some Americans, inspired by the story, placed pennies in their Norwegians, and the penny loafer was born. While the tools may have changed, the focus on artistry and craftsmanship remains strong.
Today, 5 people sit and hand-produce every one of these shoes.
Yeah. So everything we do is kind of limited edition.
Ålandsskoen has successfully fought back mass production by returning to its roots. Reimagining Tveranger's legendary design in smart and often whimsical ways.
They're actually properly paired.
Yeah, that's port and starboard.
So this is a cheat sheet for those who are trying to take their boat license.
Yes.
Join us again here on Viking.TV as we open more doors around the world on our quest to explore the planet's most fascinating cultures and delightful traditions.